Then when it comes to data storage, I think the biggest pitfall that companies fall into is that they have a lot of data on customers, but they store different types of data in different types of databases, right? So you have the click data here, and you have the survey data here, and then you have other behavioral data somewhere else, and then you have the demographic data. And then if those are not connected, you don't get a full view of the customer. You don't get a 360 view of the customer, right?
Hello and welcome to a whole new episode of Engati CX. I'm your host, Jeremy D'Souza, and today you guys are in for something amazing. We have someone who is from an organization that is absolutely known for the most phenomenal customer experiences ever. But before I reveal our amazing guest to you, allow me to first introduce you to the magic of Engati. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code digital CX platform, available across 14 channels with more than 45,000 solutions created and deployed across 186 countries in every domain and use case. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc.com, TechWorld, CIO, and many others. We run the Engati blog, video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upwards of 400,000 visitors annually. And now for our amazing, fantastic guest, Alex Genov is the head of customer research at the Zappos family of companies. He's an experienced customer research professional who applies his experimental social psychology background and his passion for research, design, and innovation to solving important customer and business problems. His goal is to help teams create remarkable products and services which makes people's lives easier and more enjoyable. But before we get started with this interview, don't forget to subscribe to the Engati channel and tap the bell icon to get access to exclusive content from thought leaders across the globe. Alex, we're really thrilled to have you with us today on the show.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's a pleasure to be here on your podcast.
Thanks. Alex, my first question to you is it's going to revolve around market research to some extent. So, when it comes to market research, how does social media contribute to the quality of the research? Does it help in understanding of market trends to some extent?
I'm sure, Jeremy. That's a great question. Social media is so pervasive in our lives nowadays, right? So it's everybody's on social media, and it makes sense that we would like to go there to find insights. And I think there are a lot of platforms and a lot of solutions that go and mine social media data. The ones that are the data that is available. You know, some platforms are open, some are closed, but I think marketers do go and listen in, if you will, to those conversations that happen on social media. I think it's based on very rudimentary text analytics, maybe looking for keywords, mentions, some sentiment maybe. But I want to point out that this is only one form of data collection when it comes to market research. It's probably an important one, but we still have to go a long way to make sure that those insights are valid in a way, right? Because there's a lot of noise on social media, and it's really tricky to extract the signal from that noise.
That's rather true. Um, my opinion, it still tends to be somewhat better than maybe a focus group or something. Um, because people, at least on social media, they are not conscious as much. They're being themselves. On a focus group, you'd probably find them trying to say what you expect them to say. What do you think about that?
For sure, yeah. I mean, you mentioned focus groups, and that's I think that's kind of the many years ago that was the standard market research method, if you will, right? Back in the day of the dawn of market research, you know, what we see on Mad Men, for example, right? The type of market research they did. So I think back in the day, a focus group was equivalent to saying I'm doing market research. It's one method and it has its pros and cons. but it's really not an ideal method. I mean, like you said, it's you can get the opinion of 10 people very quickly in an hour, right, through a guided conversation. But it's also fraught with a lot of pitfalls. People influence each other there, right? There's, like you said, this expectation to be positive, maybe, right, to say the right thing. So I'm not a big fan of focus groups. I mean, if you want to get into people's heads one-on-one, in-depth interviews is much better. And any method is not ideal. Just like surveys, right? Surveys are not a perfect method, but right now this is the only tool we have to get into people's heads, get into their attitudes, their subjective experiences, if you will, their self-report at scale. So again, getting this massive big data, if you will, on social media in terms of text data is a plus because it's really the volume of it makes a difference, but then it brings along the difficulty of analyzing it and making sense of it. So it's like there's two sides to a coin all the time, right?
That's not true. Oh, yeah, I think we should probably be looking at a whole variety of tools, a whole variety of methods rather than focusing on just one. Focus groups
Right.
could have some positives. Yes, social media is very powerful. Maybe people could consider maybe neuromarketing actually get into the head. There's a whole variety of different things that we could try, right?
Exactly. So that's a great point. I'm a big fan of really triangulating the results and again using both qualitative, quantitative methods. And you mentioned neuromarketing. So my background is in experimental social psychology, and I focused my in my academic career, I focused on emotions, how they get generated, how they get uh, perceived by the person, how we can measure them. It's not a simple thing. Emotions are not a thing that
Right.
we have like a thermometer for, if you will, right? A simple gadget for measuring them.
Yeah,
So when we talk about emotional experience and all that, we need to measure it from different angles and different aspects. And then when we put the picture together, it should be a coherent picture.
very true. Alex, what are the challenges that market research is facing in terms of data management and advanced technology?
Mhm. Another great question, Jeremy. I can talk about three aspects of that, which is data collection, the way we collect the data storage, so the way we store the data so that we can use it, and then to me, one of the big challenges and opportunities nowadays is really generating real insights and then making them really easy to consume by the business and by the stakeholders. So in terms of data collection, we already touched upon some of the things, right? So we have big data floating out there, like social media data, for example, or other big data, which is now we're getting much better at collecting that. We're very good at collecting behavioral data, right? There's so many technologies nowadays that we do. We track everything. We track every click. We track every minute you watch a video or whatever. This is enormous data. That's not a problem. But when it comes to the more subjective side of things, so how Jeremy is feeling, right, when he's using a product, or what you're thinking, or what your attitudes are, right, what your values are. The only way to get at that is through surveys, right? Because we cannot conduct 1,000 interviews in a day, but I working with partners, I can easily collect 1,000 survey responses. I mean, literally in the matter of minutes or hours.
Yeah, very
But
true.
here's, what's that?
Yeah, that's very true. You can't interview 1,000 different people. You can't probably set 1,000 of people up, put electrodes on their heads, and
Right, exactly. It's a matter of scale, right? But with that, now one of the biggest challenges that we've seen, even doing research at Zappos with surveys, we do general population surveys, right? Um, the the challenge is that nowadays 70+% up to 80% of respondents take the survey on a mobile device. And so imagine if we have this complex survey with grid questions or complex questions. We're talking about the experience of taking a survey, the customer experience of the survey taker. It can be very difficult on this small device. And that's why I think that presents a huge challenge. I don't know how it can be solved, because a lot of those sophisticated surveys are very complicated, and it's going to be very difficult to take those on a mobile device. So that's one big challenge in terms of data collection. But then when it comes to data storage, I think the biggest pitfall that companies fall into is that they have a lot of data on customers, but they store different types of data in different types of databases, right? So you have the click data here, and you have the survey data here, and then you have other behavioral data somewhere else, and then you have the demographic data. And then if those are not connected, you don't get a full view of the customer. You don't get a 360 view of the customer, right? So I want to, in the ideal case, you're going to have a unified or connected database where I know that this is Jeremy, right, who purchased this product. He looked at these other products. Then he mentioned something on social media. Then he took our voice of the customer survey and left feedback, and then called customer service, right? And then we see later on that you disappeared maybe from a database. You never shopped again. And now we can track back and say, okay, Jeremy actually had a very poor experience across, right? He had a tough time finding the product, and then he left us a negative feedback, and then he called customer service, and they were not that good, fixing his problem. So now we get the why behind customers, for example, dropping out, right? So that's what's that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's the data, the storage challenge. And then I think one of the biggest opportunities is once we have all this data, we tend to throw around this word insight very lightly, right? Insight this, insight that. Insight to me is something very surprising, something that is not obvious, and something that maybe businesses are lucky to come across one or two of these once in a while, but those are going to propel the business. Those are things that the competitors don't have access to, and so on. So these aha moments or insights, real insights, how do you, first of all, make sure that you present them in a consumable way to the business stakeholders, memorable way, right? So that people can start talking within the organization. It's very different than just dropping a 200-page like PowerPoint slide with 1,000 graphs, bars, and charts in that, and expect people to make sense of it.
True. I like what you said about unifying the entire thing, because when you do have this one view sort of thing, you know where you went wrong, you know what you can improve on. Otherwise, if you have silos everywhere, you don't know what you particularly need to improve on, where the experience broke down, and why the customer left you.
Exactly. That if you don't understand that all these data points are one customer, then you basically have this very disjointed. It's not a customer-centric approach, right? It's a data-centric approach.
Absolutely. It boils down to, well, unifying data, and in my opinion, probably tying into what you said, you need to make it easier for them to actually fill out the surveys, for them to give you that data. Because if there's too much effort involved, I probably wouldn't want to go through that effort, and I wouldn't want to give you the data. I wouldn't want to go through that survey, right?
Exactly. That's exactly right. And even if you want to, then if it's confusing, right? If half of the question is not showing, or it's this grid, half of the grid is not showing, if it's not mobile optimized, it's not going to be effective, right? And even if it's mobile optimized, if it's too long, you're going to get fatigue. Like you said, you're going to drop out. So I think it's one of the biggest challenges is how we scale survey responses at this in the age of mobile.
Yeah, you do have to take into account effort and cognitive load too over there.
For sure. Yeah, exactly.
Alex, when it comes to any kind of research, a lot of control needs to be kept in place to prevent an inconclusive study, to prevent distractions in the mix. It can't particularly be implemented while using social media. So, how should research teams combat this?
Hmm. Oh, yeah, Jeremy. I would answer this question by pointing out to two different types of research, customer research, and that's at the very highest level, it's qualitative versus quantitative. And this, I've spent a lot of time in organizations trying to first educate the organization about these two types of research, and they're very different in the methods, and they're very different in the rigor with which you need to implement research. Because if you think of research nowadays is based on the scientific method, essentially coming from psychology and from other disciplines. So the experimental method is at the heart of A/B testing. It's at the heart of a lot of those methods that I use now, and this is quantitative work. But then there's this whole other type of research which is qualitative, which is intended actually um, not to predict anything or to quantify anything, but to generate insights. So, for example, you may be conducting 10 interviews with customers, or do 10 home visits or contextual interviews, observations, and come up with this great insight, right? Based on what one person said. It's like an epiphany, like an aha moment. Okay, so that's great. That's probably you're not going to get this from big data or from surveys or any of that, because you talk to this customer, you observe that something clicked right when you talk to them. Now the question is that only one customer very unique, right? Or are there 10 million
Mhm.
people like that person, right? Then you have to quantify. So usually when in my work, I always use these methods together. So start with qualitative sometimes and then follow up with quantitative to quantify and validate, or vice versa, right? So if you come up with an insight from, maybe you come up with an insight from an interview or even social media, right? You talk about, you see a lot of people talking about a product, but you don't know if that's really a real trend. Then maybe you follow it up with a survey or with interviews and so on. And then when you complete all of that, then and you see the same trend coming up with all the types of research, then you have confidence. If you take only one
Mhm.
and run with it, then you're always going to be wondering if you're missing something. So I would say focus both on qualitative and quantitative and use them together as much as possible.
Absolutely. Start with qualitative and then validate and then quantify it. See if the insights which you found actually scale up, whether they make sense or it's just one person just telling you something from one isolated experience, right?
Exactly. Or you can go the other way, say something, I see something in the big data and in the clicks, what's going on, and then you do qualitative to understand. And then you say, okay, I know now what's going on.
Makes a lot of sense. Alex, how difficult is it to listen to and to act on the voice of the customer?
Jeremy, it's not difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It's not difficult if you have the right mindset in the organization. If it's a customer-centric mindset that, the organization believes, okay, we need to listen to our customers. Right, just like Zappos was built on the idea that customer service is really what's going to differentiate, right? And customer service in the broadest sense of great value propositions and great customer service when you call when something goes wrong, right? Very generous, like generous with the time, generous with the return process and so on. But also when it comes to all the visitors to your websites and mobile experiences, you need to have a system in place where you not only listen to their feedback, you invite their feedback, you encourage their feedback. So you basically say, how are we doing as we are using the digital experiences? So for Zappos, it was a very long process, but it's because it was a very grassroots effort at Zappos to start this voice of the customer. Because Zappos has always been excellent when it comes to phone customer service. But when it came to getting feedback from the websites and mobile experiences, it was a long effort on our part to first put in the right survey in place that's secure, right? So that behind the firewall, so we can collect information about who the customer is. Then start storing that data securely. Then the challenge became to say, okay, the net promoter score, for example, is changing, but then why, right? So don't just report changes in the score. We need to understand what to fix.
Yeah.
So then the challenge of text analytics came because now we started getting tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of comments, and that's humanly impossible to read through all those comments and figure out what's going on. So we were on a long journey to find a good text analytics partner, and finally we partnered with a really good startup out of England called Chatham Mill, and so based on that, we started to find those insights hidden in that mountain of text data, right? And so now the next challenge, the next frontier is starting to act on it, right? And I think especially to your question, how difficult is it's to act? It's difficult. It's you need to first figure out what's going on, then you have to validate it, and then you have to have the individual teams that work on that experience own that, and then read the comments, figure out what's going on, find the root causes, and then fix it. And then it needs to be prioritized because the business has a lot of other priorities coming in, right? And so it's not easy, but it's totally worth it. If you put it in place, then you can make the whole organization more customer centric, because nothing beats letting the engineers read the comments, right? Because they're like, oh yeah, the code works fine, and then they read like, I can't see this, I can't find that, and they start digging and say, oh look, this, I need to put myself in the shoes of the customer, not just say the code is fine, right?
True, true. The entire organization needs to be involved in the customer experience. It doesn't have to be just the customer service people on the front lines talking to them. Everyone needs to know what's going on.
That's it. And sometimes it's driven by the executives, and sometimes it's a combination, right, of grassroots and then top down. But yeah, it's very important to have this empathy for the customer, and the customer voice of the customer program is just one tool to make that happen.
Very true. Alex, since Zappos is so well known for fantastic customer experiences, I'd like to know what's your opinion. What's the number one thing that organizations should focus on, should do in order to dramatically improve their customer experience?
Hey, Jeremy, great question. I would say this is just my opinion, and that's been kind of my mission in the past few years, is to help the organization understand customers as people on a deeper psychological level, right? And then combine that with big data and data science and all that, because nowadays big data and data science, they're really in trend and they're very powerful, but without really focusing on the customer as a person, you can miss the mark. So that's, I would say that would be the goal, is to use all these methods that we talked about to try to understand the customer as a person, and then combine that, overlay that with big data and data science and so on, and then you're gonna have the magic happen, essentially.
Very true. You can't just look at a customer as, a number, an aggregate of something or the other. You have to understand them as people. You have to know what makes them tick, what they like, what they don't like. I
That's
think that
exactly
makes so much sense, Alex.
That's exactly right, Jeremy. So when I give keynote talks on behalf of Zappos, I start by introducing myself and I say I'm married and we have 2.4 beautiful children, right? And the audience kind of laughs, but that's the point. Is right. We want to create these emotional experiences. We want to create loyalty, but then we treat customers like numbers, right? And that those two things don't match. So we need to find the balance.
Very true. I love the example of 2.4 children. That makes so much sense. Okay, Alex, this has been fantastic. Your insights were really, really valuable. I know the audience is definitely going to love this interview. Folks, we will be back with a new expert and a new episode really soon, so stay tuned. We'll see you around for the next one, but don't forget to subscribe. And Alex, where can they reach out to you?
I'm on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place. I'm on LinkedIn, and yeah, I look forward to having conversations, more conversations like this one. Great interview, Jeremy. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Alex. Folks, reach out to Alex and hit the subscribe button on Engati. Thank you.